Hello everyone, and today I will be ranking every season of All-Stars based off the casts. Before I get into it though, I have a couple things I want to say before this ranking. Number 1, my decisions in this video are going to be based off literally everything from cast quality to the way the season was able to make use of the talents of their queens. Number 2, while I will not be factoring in things like the winner of the season or the judging, I will be factoring in some things that happen on the season like lip syncs and queens' performances, as this is All-Stars and the glow-ups of the queens should and will be considered in a ranking. The final thing before I get into the video is that I will not be including versus the world casts. This is solely US All-Stars. With all of that out of the way, the number 9 position was a very close competition between two seasons, but in the end, I decided to go with All-Stars 8. Both of these casts were very obviously picked with a winner in mind, but I'm gonna put All-Stars 8 in the number 9 slot because for all of its flaws, All-Stars 5 did a much better job than All-Stars 8, actually giving a moment to shine to the various queens that they cast to go home early. With that out of the way, just looking at the All-Stars 8 cast, I think there are some very obvious flaws. Just based off the cast reveal, I think it's very clear Jimbo is going to win this season. It is probably the most obvious win they've ever done. Looking at this lineup, there are some great queens, but the only people who did reasonably well on their original seasons are people like Jessica, Alexis, and Candy, all three of which had at most one win. Then you look at Jimbo, who is, I believe, the only queen on this cast to win multiple challenges. Another factor as to why this cast was overall kind of weak is that production did a very bad job of casting queens who are going to be slaying the challenges and in the top multiple times, who are also good lip syncers. I know I already talked about this last week, but in Drag Race casting, it is very important if you have the lip sync for your legacy format to cast queens who are not only good lip syncers, but are also actually likely to be in the top. With all of that out of the way, I will praise the season for a couple things. I think they did a great job in having variety in the seasons the queens came from. And outside of Jimbo, I think everyone on this cast had the opportunity for redemption. Those are both very good qualities to have in an All-Stars cast. It's just that in this specific case, the cons far outweigh the pros. Moving on to the 8th position on this list, we have All-Stars 5. All-Stars 5 is generally not regarded as the strongest season of All-Stars, and I think one of the main reasons behind that is that a cast like this, while full of icons, just does not work for Drag Race. I don't want to repeat everything I just said, but I think All-Stars 5 failed in a lot of the same ways as All-Stars 8. There's a very obvious winner, and as cool as it is to say that the moment we knew Shea was going to win the season was when she walked in, that does not make for a good season, and it does not reflect a balanced cast. Another flaw with the season is that this is probably the first true season of some stars, especially compared to the previous seasons. While pretty much every queen does deserve a second chance to compete on Drag Race, I do think it works against this season, and I don't want to be shady here, a lot of these queens barely made the cut for All-Stars. The final thing that drags down this cast is that on this season, there were a fair amount of glow-downs. While on All-Stars 8, a lot of queens like Kahana, James, and Lala were able to have glow-ups. Most queens this season did worse here than on their original. There's definitely some exceptions to this, like Cracker and Jujubee, but then you have queens like Derek and Shea, who, no offense, kind of did worse here than on their original season. All of this said, I don't want the start of this video to be really negative, and there definitely are some positives about this season. They did a great job balancing out this cast in terms of queens with previous wins, and even though they didn't get to shine too much due to the format, there were a lot of good lip syncers on this season. Outside of that, I'm very glad Alexis and Juju got to come back. Any All-Stars 1 redemption is always going to be good. There was a good mix of queens from old seasons and new seasons, and while I do think production did have a pre-planned top 4 going into the season, unlike on some seasons, they did in fact pick the right queens to be the pre-picked top 4. Moving on to 7th place, I'm gonna put All-Stars 3. Breaking the trend from the first two entries, this might be a hot take, but I believe the cast of this season actually looks incredible, but only without the hindsight of what actually happened on the season. Like, on paper, this cast is great. There is a ton of room for redemption. I think the only person who didn't really have anything to redeem was BB. It is incredibly balanced between seasons. I think seasons 4 and 5 are the only ones that are not represented, and this one might be controversial, but prior to the season airing, I don't think anyone on this cast is obvious filler. There is at least an argument for every person on this cast. All of that said, while this cast is great on paper, it is only great on paper. The issue with this season comes with the actual results that were brought by this cast. There were definitely still some glow-ups this season, but in the vast majority of cases, there was either a glow down or a very underwhelming glow-up. On this season, production took a lot of risks in terms of non-challenge winners, and as much as I hate to say it, I think the vast majority of them did not really pay off. As much as I love almost every queen on this cast, it very much works against the season that, in a lot of cases, specifically Chi-Chi, Kennedy, Morgan, Milk, and Thorgy, queens on the cast did worse on All-Stars 3 than they did on their original season. And unfortunately, I think Thorgy is the only case in which this was due to riggery. While there are definitely some exceptions to this, even in the cases of a glow-up like Trixie or BB, there just wasn't enough of a glow-up to make up for half the cast doing worse than originally. Moving on to the 6th position, we have All-Stars 4. Continuing on the trend of some stars casting, I think this is the first season where Drag Race production started to actually cast queens to just go home early. As a whole, I think this season was actually pretty solid and is underrated by a lot of people, but in my opinion, a fair amount of the casting just does not really work. All-Stars 4 seems to be the time where production ran out of obvious choices, so instead of doing a smaller cast, a different format, or something like that, they decided to cast 7 queens they liked and 3 very early boots in Gia, Farrah, and Jasmine. All 3 of these queens were either cast for drama on the show or their work outside of Drag Race, and I definitely get that, but it just didn't work. I would say that Gia is the only one of them to be actually mistreated. When you factor in that there are 3 obvious early boots and 2 queens from All-Stars 1, it does not really help the casting of the season that 5 of the 10 queens on the season are either returning from a previous season or cast entirely as filler. All of that said, I do have to give credit to production. They took a massive risk going for riskier casting choices on a back-to-back season, especially after All-Stars 3 didn't go too well. Having a cast with 3-time competitors and people like Monet and Mo who just got off their last season was a big risk, and it definitely helped out the season that they took it. All-Stars 3 being a mixed bag definitely could have scared production off, but they tried the idea again, and this time I think they really benefited from the risk paying off because almost all queens on the season ended up having at least a slight glow up. The final thing that makes this season solid and puts it above All-Stars 3 is the fact that if you told me before the season aired that anyone in that final 7 and 1, I would have believed you without any issue and would have been completely fine with that. That is not always the case, and I think it really speaks to how strong this cast was. Next up, in 5th place, is going to be All-Stars 9. In terms of positives, I think this cast is insanely balanced. Prior to the season, everyone but Vanjie had a win, and she very realistically deserved one, and even though the season hasn't ended yet, I would say that everyone on the season glowed up, even without the non-elimination format. In terms of a negative, I think production definitely could have done more work balancing lip syncers just like they did with All-Stars 8. There are a lot of queens who do great in the challenges who are just not great lip syncers. All of that said, while it is not the cast's fault, the whole season comes off kind of middle of the road due to the lack of drama. It is not going to be working against the cast on this list, but it is pretty notable. Overall, while I know it is controversial, I think All-Stars 9 is just an all-around middle of the road season, and in terms of casts, it is not bad by any means, but I just couldn't justify putting it above any cast in the top 4. Moving on to the top 4, these are the casts that are just all around great, and starting us off is going to be All-Stars 7. I'll say it now, I know it is kind of controversial to put All-Star 7 this low, but I couldn't really justify putting it any higher on this list. On one hand, this is a cast that is insanely high quality in terms of competitors, but even with that, everyone on this cast was able to glow up on their original season. We had some of the best runways, challenge performances, and lip syncs we've seen in a while. This was just overall a very high quality group of people. That is a massive positive, and this is an overall great cast, but on the other hand, I do have to say this, and I will say the cast does make up for it. Jinx is an insanely obvious winner. Everyone on this cast is absolutely incredible, and Jinx's win was 100% deserved, but I do think the fact that there is such an obvious outcome this season does drag it from 3rd place to 4th. Speaking of third place, we have All Stars 6. I would make the argument that this season is probably the biggest risk in terms of casting Drag Race production has ever done, and unlike a lot of the seasons previously on this list, this is a situation that made for great TV, and I do think that this risk 100% paid off. Every single queen on this cast has something to redeem. There is not a single person that was an obvious finalist. There were great lip syncers throughout this entire cast, and I would argue that Kylie and Raja are some of the best all-time glow-ups we have ever seen. This season was a joy to watch, and it is almost entirely due to the cast. The lip sync assassin format is incredibly hit or miss. It requires an incredible cast, and I think this is the one time production pulled it off. I would make the argument that any number of things could have ruined this season, but this cast just clicked with each other insanely well, and every single star aligned to deliver a great season. In my opinion, this is the second best season of All Stars, and I think that is almost entirely due to this cast. The only negative I could think of was that there were some pretty obvious early boots, but factoring in how much every part of this cast shined, I feel justified putting this in third place. If you disagree, I completely understand. It's just my opinion that in this situation, the pros do outweigh the cons. In second place, and I hope this isn't going to be controversial, is All Stars 1. To probably no one's surprise when you look at who is on there, All Stars 1 was an all-time great cast. I have not done the math on this, but I think this is the highest average placement any season of All Stars has had outside of All Winners. Almost every queen on this cast had either insane lip sync skills or did at least pretty well on their season. Most queens have storyline with at least someone else on the season, and for that reason, I do understand why production thought the teams format would have been a good idea. Even though it was a terrible idea with the episode order they got and the amount of iconic queens that were available, I understand that line of thinking. One of the only downsides of this season is, just like Survivor All-Stars, this season is so stacked that pretty much every elimination is going to hurt. But on the other hand, that works as a massive positive, as it just shows how incredibly stacked this cast is. While having back-to-back heartbreaking eliminations and a terrible format would be huge negatives in a ranking of the seasons, looking at this cast as a whole, I think that this season, as they say in sports ball, is a home run. The only downsides of the season are a lack of major glow-ups, but that is mainly due to the queens being great to begin with, especially for the time, and the fact that everyone on this cast is iconic for something good except for Mimi. I understand casting someone for the drama, but I do think her casting should count as some points against this season. Finishing off this list in first place, to hopefully no one's surprise, we have All Stars Season 2. This cast is amazing. This is just my opinion, but I believe this is the second greatest cast in reality TV history behind Survivor Heroes vs. Villains. Every single person on this cast more than earned their slot. Excluding All Winners, I believe this is the only season of All Stars where every single queen has a win. This cast is full of great lip syncers, and every queen on the season has a storyline, a lot of them with each other, which is an even larger plus. While this season is a bit heavy on the Season 5 queens, I do think it is very justified. I don't think there's a single one of them that I would cut. Another more mixed part of the season is that there was no Coco versus Alyssa storyline, but once again, it does make sense, and I'm not gonna lie, I probably would have been angry if production had rigged the season to make this storyline happen. The literal only downside I can think of to this entire season is that some queens were kind of pressured a bit to be there, but with that exception, every single part of this cast is completely flawless. There were glow-ups across the board, some of the strongest lip syncs in All Stars history, and I would argue, and I think most would agree, that the mirror scene is probably the best scene of Drag Race ever. This season is a masterclass in how to put an All Stars group together, and overall, I think the fact that All Stars 1 and All Stars 2 are the top two seasons on here kind of proves that All Stars should not be a yearly thing and instead be, I would say, every 3 to 4 years. Do you want non-Emmy nominated gay shit? Well, then you should check out the RuPaul's Drag Race Rejudged YouTube channel and hit subscribe.